Today we are talking about the biography of Simon Bolivar. And I don't know if it's Bolivar or Bolivar, but we'll use the term Bolivar, like Bolivia, as we say here in the UK. Today we are talking about the biography of Simon Bolivar, the man who liberated Latin America from the hegemony of the Spanish. And what did Simon have a passion for, may you ask? This is an ancient history channel. Classics, yes, classics. He did a grand tour and was very into the ideals of liberty that were promoted by the Roman Republic. So we will be doing a biography of Simon Bolivar and talking about his love of classics. If you don't know who I am, my name is Moray. I'm a real woman, not an avatar, and this is Moray's Muse, a channel a channel who hates AI. We do not use AI in any of our production. Our lovely editor has hell editing the stuff I talk about in these videos, and we write all our content. So you should subscribe and like this if you hate slop too. The biography of Simon Bolivar, let's get into it, guys. Venezuela in the late 18th century. What was it like? This was the time that Simon Bolivar was born into. You had a lot of socio-racial hierarchies and escalating imperial friction. Simon Bolivar is born into this environment in Caracas, July the 24th, 1783. It was a world that was fundamentally shaped by the Bourbon reforms. These were implemented by the Spanish crown and Charles III. It was to streamline imperial administration and maximize fiscal extraction. And it wanted to reassert metropolitan control over the American colonies. The crown utilizes merchant monopolies, like the Basques. They had the Royal Guipuzcoan Company of Caracas, and this was a Basque-led company. This company held exclusive rights over Venezuela's lucrative cacao business, and this monopoly is squeezing local producers. There's a rebellion by Juan Francisco de Leon, who's a local planter, and he's also a sheriff. And this is a challenge to the hegemony of the Spanish and this Basque company. Because I think of the Basques and the Spanish, or is it the Basques? I think of like the Basques, the Basque and the Spanish as being different people. There's also a bit of a friction with the elites of Caracas at this time, right? The Mantuanos resent the monopoly of the Spanish, but they also profit from it. So they really feared like the lower classes who were racially diverse and volatile, right? And so the elites, you know, they acted as agents of the colonial order. And this instinct was exemplified by Bolivar's own family. Bolivar's own ancestor, Jose Bolivar Aguirre, bad pronunciation. Simon Bolivar's ancestor also participated in the suppression of the Leon popular rebellions, a riot. And the Bolivar family are like elites, and they are elites, right? They have wealth derived from agricultural estate, copper plantations, and say it for me, slave plantations. Bolivar family suppressed the lower class, okay? And they're engaging with Spanish imperial bureaucracy. Late colonial Venezuelan society, caste system essentially. Then we have the royal decree in 1789, I believe. And I'm not even gonna try and pronounce a lot of the Spanish because I've lost most of my Spanish now because my angani and Sheridan Camrag now. The 1789 royal decree, it attempts to regulate slave treatment and allow manumission for older slaves, unsettling traditional agricultural labor controls. But it's the tip of the iceberg, realistically. You know, the Spanish need to give broader reforms. You see the Haitian Revolution happen. In the Caribbean, the white elite are worried that the mixed race population are gonna overthrow them. Anyway, so this is the environment that Simon Bolivar was born into. And the Mantuanos, the elites, were open to Enlightenment ideals. The Enlightenment critiqued European absolutism, but they needed to preserve their domestic control. Simon Bolivar's childhood was really complex. He had a lot of things, but a lot of personal loss. His father, Juan Vicente Bolivar y Ponte, died of tuberculosis when Simon's only 3 years old. His mother then passes away when Simon's 6, and he's an orphan at the age of 9. So he's like a young aristocrat who inherits like a lot of stuff. One of the largest fortunes in Venezuela. Actually, no, scrap that. One of the largest fortunes in the West Indies. Guardianship of like young Simon is led by his uncle, his tío, but young Simon is really volatile and there's a lot of domestic conflict. Actually, young Simon Bolivar is placed with a lawyer, Miguel José Sanz, and in June 1795, the 12-year-old Bolivar fled his uncle's custody and sought refuge at the home of his sister Maria Antonia and her husband. It goes to court and Simon is placed in the primary school of a very radical teacher, Simon Rodriguez, and this is who educates him full-time. But this is a turning point for Simon because his intellectual development really grows. Rodriguez was a radical follower of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Bolivar's upbringing is completely changed. He has a natural education. Rodriguez educates Simon in a lot of physical activity, so long hikes, horsemanship, and a direct engagement with nature. And Simon Bolivar is studying enlightened thought, you know, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, Voltaire, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and many others. Bolivar is like learning about like natural rights, individual liberty, and government by consent. Age of 16, Bolivar is sent to Spain to complete his education, and he arrives in Madrid in like 1799. Lodges with his financially strapped uncles who are lobbying the Spanish court for titles of nobility. He relocates to like a Basque intellectual, Marquis de Ustariz, and this is where Bolivar gets his classics training. So Bolivar does something called a Grand Tour. Grand Tours, I love the concept of Grand Tours. I've done a Grand Tour, my editor's done a smaller Grand Tour, but still a Grand Tour. Back in the day, Grand Tour would be when a young man would travel around Europe on the pursuit of learning things about classics, which is what happened to me. Simon Bolivar marries his wife, Maria Teresa del Toro y Alesia, in May 1802, and the young couple sailed towards Venezuela, settling into Caracas. However, his wife dies of yellow fever, so Bolivar goes on a Grand Tour. He arrives in Paris in 1804, and this is when France was transitioning from consulate to the First Empire, so Napoleon vibes, and he settles into like the Parisian social world with his cousin Fanny du Bias. Bolivar has just walked into like a storm of culture. You know, you've got the Lemaitre brothers, young Eugene du Beauharnais, and he meets Alexander von Humboldt and Amy Bonpland, who have made like a five-year expedition through Spanish America. And he's questioning, like, what is the future of South America? Because there's a Spanish hegemony. And Humboldt, who's speaking about the insane amount of natural resources in, you know, South America, they remark back, I believe your country is ready for independence, but I cannot see who is the man who will achieve it. Bolivar witnesses Napoleon's coronation, self-coronation. In 1805, he travels to Italy with his former tutor, Simon Rodriguez, crossing the Alps. Bolivar thinks Napoleon's a military genius, apparently. He's repulsed by how Napoleon gives up the Republican ideals. And Simon Bolivar starts to realize that a single charismatic leader could mobilize a revolution. But the goal of such leadership should be stability, right? And constitutional republics rather than an empire. And definitely no monarchies. A 22-year-old Simon Bolivar climbs Aventine Hill. If you know your classics, you know this is something people do when you're going through it and you're thinking of a lot and you're relating your life to classics. It's a site where the Roman plebeians climbed, and this is where they gained their freedom from patrician oppression. And Bolivar climbs Aventine Hill with his former tutor Rodrigo and says that he's gonna like dedicate his life to like liberating South America. Simon Rodriguez writes down an oath. So we need to talk about Bolivar's kind of political beliefs. People think that it's a lot of European political theory. It's a synthesis of classical antiquity, or beliefs from classical antiquity, the Republican era, Cicero, and then Enlightenment statecraft, which was adapted to 19th century South America. Simon Bolivar is like very influenced by like environmental determinism. He thinks that laws and institutions must reflect the physical geography, climate, and religion of a place. Bolivar uses this theory to reject the United States from the Spanish colonies. You can see this in Bolivar's Carta de Jamaica. And he says that Spanish Americans have active tyranny. Bolivar concludes that Venezuela's first republic in 1811 had been a disaster, placing a weak, fragmented government in the face of highly royalist armies. Bolivar formulates a theory of Republican imperialism, so he proposes the creation of a large, highly centralized state such as Gran Colombia or a broader Andean confederation. It's got to survive against European empires. In Bolivar's 1819 Angostura address, he argues that morals and enlightenment are like poles of a republic. He believes that we need to form a new government, a moral power based on the Roman censorate, or at least the Athenian Areopagus. And he thinks that virtuous citizens who are appointed for life should oversee the education of youth, police public morality, and denounce corruption. Bolivar wants to construct a confederation of South American states, and Bolivar gets this from classical Greek models, stuff that he got from his Gran tour. So Bolivar really thought about the kind of state he wanted to build, and it was highly based on classics, okay? And Enlightenment, but classics and Enlightenment. Bolivar is all about getting rid of the monarchy and getting rid of slavery. Monarchy and slavery, bye-bye. But it has to be through a highly centralized, merit-based state. Now, let's talk about if Simon Bolivar's political vision actually worked in practice, or whether it just challenged it. At the Congress of Angostura in 1819, Bolivar proposes this, and it's consolidated in 1821 at the Congress of Cúcuta. This colossal state united the territories of the Viceroy of New Granada, right? And the modern day states included Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, and Ecuador. Gran Colombia wasn't like a local republic, but it's a geopolitical necessity because the United States and Europe are like major powers. Gran Colombia was vast and rugged. Tropical jungles, seasonally flooded plains, roads were non-existent and treacherous, and communications between the centralized capital and Bogota and regions like Caracas were like impossible. Local elites did not like this system. It was a new form of imperialism to them. The social and economic realities of this were not good. Bolivar was an idealist. Whilst Bolivar was all for getting rid of inequality, the eradication of slavery, policies severely limited. The white landowner elite had to maintain order. I mean, that's not... The wars of independence had devastated the economy. The giving of land to soldiers wasn't a very good plan. Impoverished soldiers actually stole their land and their bonds for immediate cash, because they're like, why do we want land? We need cash. It was an idealist plan. This plan, when it was executed, the rural majority hated it. And also in places like Bogota, the civilian administration by Vice President Francisco de Paula Santander, who championed legalistic constitutionalism, federalism, and economic liberalism, conflicted with Bolivar's principles. And Bolivar's principles were on executive centralized power. And also you had military chieftains like Jose Antonio Paez. Venezuela commanded the loyalty of local people and local forces. So they were already challenging Bolivar and wanted to start a coup. And yeah, in 1830 it all goes like Pete Tong. It all goes wrong. Venezuela and Ecuador leave Gran Colombia and the Central Union is in ruins. This is the end of Simon Bolivar's grand project. At this point, Bolivar is terminally ill and he pens a letter in 1830 to General Juan Jose Flores, articulating how disillusioned he is. In conclusion, yeah, whilst he was known as the Liberator, it was kind of like a designation rather than a title that was bestowed on him. Nice little Simon Bolivar, who had quite the thing for the Roman Republic. Well, he didn't end like Cicero. It didn't end well either. Simon Bolivar had quite a thing for Cincinnatus, who we did a video on. In December the 17th in 1830, in near poverty and political exile due to his plans, kind of based on the Roman Republic. In Colombia, he's denounced as a tyrant by his former allies. Gran Colombia is completely shattered, but his death did not mark the death of his political influence. Instead, he started a whole thing. He's seen as father of the fatherland, right? His execution wasn't very good, but it did start the cult of Bolivar. To many historians of the time, he became the ideal of anti-imperialist freedom. His myth was revered by Hugo Chavez and the Bolivian Revolution. Chavez utilized Bolivar's writings and classical imagery. Here's a country named after him, okay guys? I mean, that's how much his legacy lived on. And yeah, he's a complex figure, but we're tired of doing this video right now. So yeah, he was complex. Talk about it in the comments.